In 1901, the Mersey Docks and Harbour Board completed a warehouse on Stanley Dock in Liverpool, designed to store 36,000 hogsheads of tobacco. At the time of construction, Liverpool was handling 14,000 hogsheads annually. The warehouse was built with capacity for more than twice the city's total annual tobacco trade. The brick walls were 4 feet thick, although 2 feet would have been structurally sufficient. 14 stories rose 125 feet above the dock, fully fireproofed with cast-iron columns and wrought-iron beams throughout. Critics described it as grotesque overbuilding for a commodity whose trade volumes might never justify such scale. The warehouse operated for 79 years, storing tobacco, cotton, and general cargo. It never came close to its capacity. Yet when Liverpool's docks collapsed economically in the 1980s and dozens of warehouses were demolished, the tobacco warehouse survived. Its excessive size became its salvation. Too large to demolish cheaply, too solidly built to collapse, and ultimately too significant to erase. The tobacco that would never fill it became irrelevant. The walls built to contain it endured. In the late 19th century, Liverpool was the second largest port in the British Empire after London. The docks handled cotton from America, grain from Canada, timber from Scandinavia, and tobacco from Virginia and the Carolinas. Tobacco arrived in hogsheads, wooden casks weighing between 800 and 1,000 pounds when full. A single ship could carry hundreds of hogsheads. Unloading, inspecting, warehousing, and redistributing this cargo required vast covered storage space close to the waterfront. The existing warehouses on the older docks were inefficient and overcrowded. The Mersey Docks and Harbour Board required modern facilities capable of accommodating projected growth in trade. As you watch this video, you will see the subscribe button below. And when you press it, you are not only supporting the creation of more content like this, but also becoming part of the very exchange we have been discussing. That is why you should like the video and subscribe to the channel. Join those who understand that structures built for futures that never arrive often outlast those built solely for what already exists. Liverpool's tobacco imports had grown steadily throughout the 1880s and 1890s, reaching 14,000 hogsheads per year by 1900. Planners assumed that growth would continue indefinitely. They designed the Stanley Dock warehouse to hold 36,000 hogsheads, more than 2.5 times the current volume. The logic was straightforward. Liverpool would dominate Britain's tobacco trade for decades, American production would expand, and demand for warehousing would increase accordingly. None of these assumptions proved correct. American tobacco exports did rise, but they were increasingly processed into cigarettes before shipment, reducing the need for bulk storage in British ports. Competing ports such as Southampton developed their own facilities. Liverpool's share of the trade stagnated and then declined. The warehouse that was expected to be filled by future growth stood largely empty from the day it opened. Construction began in 1897 on a site adjacent to Stanley Dock, one of Liverpool's newer dock complexes. The design was straightforward, a massive rectangular block 14 stories high, built entirely of brick and internally fireproofed with cast-iron columns and wrought-iron floor beams. The architect was not attempting to create aesthetic beauty. The objective was maximum storage volume within a minimal footprint, with complete fire resistance to protect valuable tobacco from the flames that regularly destroyed timber warehouses. Brick was chosen because it was fireproof, durable, and locally available. The scale, however, was unprecedented. At 125 feet in height and covering roughly 40,000 square feet at ground level, the warehouse would be the largest brick building under a single roof in the world. The brick walls were 4 feet thick at the base, tapering to 3 feet on the upper floors. Structural calculations indicated that 2-foot walls would have been sufficient to carry the loads, yet the specification required double that thickness. The reasoning was twofold. Thicker walls delayed heat penetration and thus improved fire resistance, and they provided additional mass to stabilize the tall structure against wind loading. Liverpool lies on the Irish sea coast and is exposed to strong westerly gales. A 14-story brick building presents a considerable wind surface area. Thinner walls might have required extensive internal bracing or external buttressing. 4-foot walls eliminated that concern entirely. The trade-off was cost and construction time. Laying millions of additional bricks was expensive and slow. The Mersey Docks and Harbour Board accepted both as necessary for a building intended to last a century. Bricklayers worked in shifts, laying courses by hand from timber scaffolding that rose as the walls climbed higher. Lime mortar was used throughout. Portland cement was available, but considered too rigid for a structure of this height, which would experience thermal expansion and minor settlement. Lime mortar permitted slight movement without cracking. The bricks themselves were ordinary engineering bricks, red-orange in color, fired locally in Lancashire. No decorative facing was applied. This was industrial architecture in its purest form. Function dictated every decision. The result was austere, a vast rectangular block rising sheer from the dockside, punctured by small windows set into thick walls. It looked precisely like what it was, a container for storing bulk goods on an enormous scale. The interior was equally uncompromising. Each floor was supported by rows of cast iron columns positioned at regular intervals to carry the weight of stored cargo. The columns were hollow to save material, yet oversized for strength. Each measured 12 inches in diameter and could support loads far exceeding the weight of stacked hogsheads. The floor beams were wrought iron, spanning between the columns. Timber planking laid over the beams formed the actual floor surface. This system was standard in Victorian warehouses, but the scale at Stanley Dock was not. 14 stories required hundreds of columns and miles of iron beams. The cost of materials alone exceeded that of many entire warehouses of the period. Fire protection was taken to extremes. In 1901, sprinkler systems were not yet widely used in Britain, so fire prevention relied on material selection and compartmentalization. The iron structure would not burn. The brick walls would not burn. Timber floors would burn, but slowly, and the iron beams would support them long enough for firefighting efforts to respond. The warehouse was internally divided at regular intervals by brick firewalls, creating compartments to limit the spread of flames. Doors between compartments were iron-clad. Stairwells were enclosed within brick shafts. The entire design assumed that fire would eventually occur and was engineered to contain it rather than prevent it outright. The warehouse opened in 1901 with considerable ceremony. The Mersey Docks and Harbour Board presented it as evidence of Liverpool's determination to maintain its position as Britain's leading Atlantic port. The press described it as the largest warehouse in the world. Tobacco merchants inspected the vast floors and expressed satisfaction with the facilities. Then reality intervened. Liverpool's tobacco trade in 1902 amounted to 15,000 hogsheads, only marginally higher than in 19. The 36,000 hogshead warehouse stood two-thirds empty. In 1903, trade fell to 13,000 hogsheads. The warehouse remained largely vacant. Merchants began using it for general cargo, cotton bales, grain sacks, manufactured goods, anything requiring covered storage. Tobacco, the commodity for which it had been built, occupied only a small fraction of the available space. This situation persisted for decades. The warehouse never filled with tobacco. It never even came close. The optimistic projections that had justified its construction proved substantially inaccurate. Liverpool's tobacco trade peaked in the early 1900s and then declined steadily as cigarette manufacturing became centralized in London and Southampton attracted more transatlantic traffic. By the 1920s, Stanley Dock handled less tobacco than it had in 1890. Designed for an expanding future, the warehouse served a contracting past. Nevertheless, it continued operating. The floors were strong enough to bear any load. The fire protection safeguarded diverse cargoes. Its location on the dockside allowed goods to be unloaded from ships and placed under cover within minutes. Built as a specialized tobacco store, it became a general-purpose warehouse and fulfilled that role adequately for 79 years. Its overbuilt nature contributed to its longevity in ways the designers may not have foreseen. 4-foot brick walls were almost immune to weathering. Rain penetrated only inches before evaporating. Freeze-thaw cycles that would have destroyed thinner walls over decades had minimal effect on such mass. Wind caused neither movement nor cracking. The cast iron columns and wrought iron beams required little maintenance beyond occasional painting. Timber floors wore down under cargo handling and were periodically replaced, but the fundamental structure remained unchanged. When the warehouse closed in 1980, It had operated for 79 years with virtually no structural repairs. The excessive thickness criticized in 1901 had become practical durability by 19... Its closure resulted not from structural failure, but from economic collapse. During the 1960s and 1970s, shipping shifted towards containerization and traffic moved to modern ports elsewhere, leading to a catastrophic decline in Liverpool's dock trade. Stanley Dock, designed for manual cargo handling with cranes and hoists, could not accommodate container ships. Traffic dried up, warehouses emptied. By 1980, the tobacco warehouse stood vacant. Facing bankruptcy, the Mersey Docks and Harbour Board began demolishing unused buildings to reduce maintenance costs and release land for redevelopment. Dozens of Victorian warehouses were pulled down. The tobacco warehouse, however, posed a problem. Its size and construction rendered demolition expensive. 4-foot brick walls do not yield easily. 14 stories of cast-iron columns and wrought iron beams cannot simply be toppled. They must be dismantled piece by piece. The scrap value of the materials did not justify the cost of demolition. The warehouse was left standing, not from sentiment, but because destroying it was economically irrational. For 20 years, the building stood empty and abandoned. Water leaked through damaged roofs, windows shattered, pigeons nested on the upper floors. Yet the structure itself scarcely deteriorated. The brick walls shed surface dust, but remained solid. The iron columns showed surface rust, but no structural corrosion. The foundations, laid upon Liverpool clay and bedrock, did not settle by a single millimeter. Built to endure a century of active use, the structure proved capable of surviving decades of complete neglect. This endurance ultimately saved it. By the 2000s, public attitudes towards Victorian industrial architecture had shifted. Structures once dismissed as obsolete eyesores were recognized as irreplaceable heritage. The tobacco warehouse received Grade II listing and legal protection. Developers who might have demolished it in the 1980s were now obliged to preserve it. Adaptive reuse followed, though slowly. The building's sheer scale complicated conversion. Residential use required the installation of modern services, water, electricity, and heating, in a structure designed for storing barrels. Office use demanded windows and natural light in a building whose 4-foot thick walls had been deliberately designed with minimal openings. Retail use contended with floors built for cargo rather than people. Each proposal encountered the same fundamental issue. The warehouse had been optimized for a single purpose, and that purpose no longer existed. Yet the quality of construction ultimately made adaptation feasible. The floors could bear any load. Fire compartments could be converted into separate units. The brick walls provided acoustic and thermal insulation that modern buildings struggled to match. What had seemed excessive in 1901 became advantageous by 2010. Conversion proceeded in stages between 2012 and 2014. The lower floors became commercial and retail space. Upper floors were transformed into residential lofts. The cast-iron columns and wrought iron beams were left exposed as architectural features. The brick walls were cleaned and repointed where necessary, but otherwise left intact. Developers marketed the property as living within Liverpool's maritime history. Residents paid premiums for apartments enclosed by 4-foot thick walls, valuing the quiet, the solidity, and the connection to the city's past. The warehouse that had never filled with tobacco now filled with people who appreciated precisely the qualities that had once seemed wasteful. Modern warehouse design bears no resemblance to Stanley Dock. Contemporary facilities are lightweight steel structures clad in thin metal, designed for specific automated systems with calculated service lives of 30 to 50 years. When those systems become obsolete or a building's purpose ends, demolition is straightforward and expected. Such structures are optimized for efficiency, not longevity. They serve their function well, but cannot adapt when that function changes. Stanley Dock's tobacco warehouse was the opposite. Over-designed, overbuilt, and optimized for a purpose that never materialized. Yet its excessive quality enabled it to survive economic collapse, decades of abandonment, and the complete obsolescence of its intended function. It exists today not because it succeeded in its original role, but because it was not built so poorly as to fail entirely. Modern warehouse design bears no resemblance to Stanley Dock. Contemporary facilities are lightweight steel structures clad in thin metal, designed for specific automated systems with calculated service lives of 30 to 50 years. When those systems become obsolete or a building's purpose ends, demolition is straightforward and expected. Such structures are optimized for efficiency, not longevity. They serve their function well, but cannot adapt when that function changes. Stanley Dock's tobacco warehouse was the opposite: over-designed, overbuilt, and optimized for a purpose that never materialized. Yet its excessive quality enabled it to survive economic collapse, decades of abandonment, and the complete obsolescence of its intended function. It exists today not because it succeeded in its original role, but because it was not built so poorly as to fail entirely. If you have watched this video to this point, you have seen how a mega construction marvel from the past was built, and how it has endured to the present day. For more information like this, do not forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Today, the tobacco warehouse still stands on Stanley Dock, its brick walls as solid as on the day they were laid. The hogsheads of tobacco it was designed to store never arrived. The booming trade that had been anticipated never materialized. Yet the warehouse adapted to its era. When tobacco declined, it stored cotton. When cotton moved elsewhere, it stored general cargo. And still it stands.